Hello, Prisma Day. Let's talk about Blitz.js, the new full stack framework for React. Before I get into it, I'll give a quick overview of what Blitz is. Blitz is built on Next.js and Prisma 2. Blitz is inspired by Ruby on Rails and provides a lot of the developer experience and productivity that Rails provides. And lastly, Blitz has a new full stack data layer that has never been seen before, and it's super awesome. I'll talk about it in a few moments. But first, why a new framework? We already have Next.js, which is a framework for React, and now Blitz is a framework for a framework? What is happening here? Why? What's going on? Well, the reality is that building a full stack application today is too hard and too complex. So many people are yearning for a simpler, easier way to build full stack apps, and Blitz is the answer to that. Additionally, there's this process that happens in all areas of technology called bundling and unbundling. So an example of bundling was Ruby on Rails. It took many different libraries and things and integrated them together, bundled them together into a really nice, easy to use framework. And then fast forward to React, and that was an example of unbundling because React was hyper focused on just one specific area of your application. And we've had this explosion of tiny focused libraries and JavaScript. And that's been amazing for experimentation, and we've made so much progress. But now it's time for another bundling, and that's what Blitz is providing. So I'm going to talk about the foundational principles of Blitz. Full stack and monolithic, API not required, convention over configuration, loose opinions, easy to start, easy to scale, stability, and community over code. So full stack and monolithic, what does this mean? It means you only have one thing to build and one thing to deploy. There's only one thing to reason about. And so a monolith means that it's much easier and faster to develop your application than any other decoupled architecture, such as microservices, or even just a backend API and a front end that are separated. A monolith is so much faster and easier. Now, there are some drawbacks, especially with traditional monoliths, but a modern monolith scales much better. Scaling is one of the most common issues with the monolith, but serverless makes a big difference here, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. Secondly, the vast majority of apps don't really need to scale very much. So for example, in the United States, 99% of all businesses have less than 100 employees. And then something around 95% have less than 50 employees. So this means the very, very large majority of us are small companies serving small companies. Granted, some of these small companies can serve millions of users, but the reality is, the vast majority have way less than a million users. And so they don't need to scale very much. Most of us in the world are not building Silicon Valley unicorns. So this means that we need a framework that's optimized for this 99% use case, not optimized just for the Silicon Valley unicorn that needs to scale to billions of users. API not required. Now, what is this? Because traditionally, an API is required for any type of single page app, right? You have to have a backend API in order to get your data to the front end. But the problem is APIs add complexity and they slow you down even more than you might realize. So how Blitz got started was a little over 3 months ago. I had a call with a friend of mine that's deeply into the Ruby on Rails ecosystem. And we were sparring back and forth about the differences and trade-offs between Ruby on Rails and React apps. We were talking about different productivity benefits, technology benefits, And after we finished that call, I was greatly vexed with the simplicity of Ruby on Rails. It's so simple because there's not this entire API component in the middle of your app. And for example, you can even access your database directly in your view. It's not recommended, but you can do it because it's so simple. So I was thinking after that call that, you know what, I think now is the time for Ruby on Rails for React and JavaScript, because we have Next.js, which is an amazing framework that so many people love. And especially within the last year, they've added a lot of great new features. And then secondly, Prisma 2 is now available. And that's like one of the last missing pieces for a nice full stack developer experience, because accessing the database is like one of the hardest problems people have. And so it needs to be really easy and nice. And Prisma 2 is doing a great job here. All right, now how does this actually work, right? Because how can we just get rid of the API for React app and still have client-side rendering? That sounds ridiculous. But how we do it is we abstract the API into a compile step. This allows you to import your server code directly into your front-end React components, and it just works. So how you write your server code in Blitz apps are Blitz queries and mutations. These are plain asynchronous JavaScript functions that always run on the server. So there's no GraphQL here. It's just we just use the same naming. But then, of course, you can add your own API if you need. So if you have advanced use cases, if you have a third-party API already, of course, you can still use that just like you always have. You can add custom API routes. So just like with Next.js, you can build out a REST API or GraphQL API. Like all of that's up to you. And then additionally, the Blitz queries and mutations, you can also reuse those by third parties. So you can add token authentication, which will be easy for you to do, and then you can use queries and mutations without any API because it's automatically generated for you. So let's look at the architecture here. Along the top, we have client code, so code that runs on the client. On the bottom, we have code that runs on the server. The purple boxes are React pages. On the left, we have a server-side rendered page, which has code executing on both the client and the server. On the top right, we have a page that is client-side rendered only. Okay, there's no SSR here. And then at the bottom right, we have two green boxes, which is a Blitz query and a Blitz mutation, get listing and update listing. So if you have an SSR page, then you can just import that function directly, and it's just a direct function call. It doesn't actually make an API call in that case. But when you access a query or mutation from your client-side rendered page, then this magical gray box appears at build time because of Blitz. It's an auto-generated JSON API. It exposes your queries and mutations at a certain URL, and then that direct function import is swapped out with an API call. But when you're building your app, you don't have to know that. So let's look at what the code looks like. Here is the get listing query that always runs on the server. So the first line, we import the database from a database file. So this is a instantiated database client, and it's Prisma 2, of course, along with the types here. So this is one thing that's super nice about Prisma 2 is we get these automatically generated types from your database, and then we can use those types as to type the input of this query. And you can see we export its asynchronous function. Inside that function, we access the database directly and return that result. Now this is very simple, of course, but you would add authentication, or not authentication, sorry, authorization here, maybe any other kind of processing or fire off background jobs or events. So all of that would happen here. So pretty simple. Now, how do we use this query in your app, right? So here is a React component that's using that query. So we import a couple hooks from Blitz, and then on the second line, we import that get listing function from that file. So this is a direct function import. And inside this component, we get the listing ID route parameter, and then we pass the get listing query into the use query hook along with the arguments for that query. And then that returns the listing object, and we can use that in our component. So this is it. This is all you have to do to use to get data all the way from your database to your front end. No GraphQL, no GraphQL queries, schemas, no REST, no fetching, nothing. You just import it and use it. It's so awesome and so fast and easy. Now, this use query hook is provided by, it's built on React Query. So you get all the amazing things that React Query provides, like caching, automatic cache and validation when you come back to a page, polling, etc. So super nice. All right, convention over configuration. Convention over configuration means that everything works by default without configuring. So a lot of the menial decisions, boring decisions are done for you. These are like decisions that you have to make for every single app. And a lot of them, you end up making the same decision over and over, or it just doesn't matter. And so we do that for you. And we also do all the boring work for you. Like, like you can spend up to a week setting up a new application, and all of that is done for you. Yes, Lint is configured, Husky, Git hooks, all of these different like integration of all these things together. We do that for you. So this doesn't mean that there's no configuration. It means that configuration is optional. So I already talked briefly about the new app setup. This is one area where the convention is pretty noticeable. And Blitz is database agnostic, so it will work with any database, any ORM, any database client. But Prisma 2 is the default because we think it's the best for most people. The other area where you will see convention over configuration is with code organization and scaffolding. So out of the box, we have a really nice file structure already set up for you. And we have these really awesome code generator tools that can generate working code for like an entire model. So you can run Blitz generate all, say, task, and it'll generate the Prisma model. It'll generate the queries, mutations, the pages, everything you need for end-to-end for creating a task, updating a task, deleting a task, and viewing a list of tasks. Now, if you want to go outside the convention, you can. The default scaffolding won't work, but we will add the ability to customize the code generator so that you can set up something totally custom if you want to. Moving on to loose opinions. Blitz is opinionated, and it gives you a happy path that is going to be good for most use cases. But Blitz isn't arrogant. It knows that there's not a single magic bullet for every application. And so for many things, many times we don't enforce the conventions or enforce our opinions. For example, the file structure, we have a default file structure for you, but the only things that we enforce are that pages are in pages because that's how you do your routing. And then queries and mutations are in the corresponding folders because that's how we generate the API. And then also API routes are inside the API folder. But one thing to note here that's different than Next is that you can have a pages folder all in every directory. So you can organize your pages by like the main context, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's so you have a lot of flexibility here is the point. And when there's not consensus, we give you a choice. So a great example is a styling solution. Nobody in the React community has really agreed on like the best styling here. So what we will do is add a prompt when you're setting up a new app, and we'll show you the most popular styling like libraries or frameworks, and we'll let you choose which one you want, whether it's like style components or Tailwind CSS, etc. And then whichever one you choose, the app will be already set up and configured for that. And so this strikes a good balance between um, not forcing you to use like something that you don't want to use, but also like, and so it gives you the choice, but then it's also um, you don't have to set it up manually. Where today you have to configure everything together, set it up yourself. So overall, Blitz is more flexible and has less magic than Ruby on Rails. And I think it strikes a good balance between kind of Ruby on Rails on one extreme and then the wild west of React development today. All right, easy to start, easy to scale. Now, this is very important for the success of any framework, I think, because at the starting, it has to be easy for everyone to get started. So easy for beginners means that someone new to programming who's just learning HTML, just learning about databases and React and JavaScript, they should not have to learn advanced technologies like GraphQL. That's a total non-starter for them. And so Blitz addresses this very nicely. But on the other hand, it also must be easy to scale, right? Otherwise, it's not going to be good for production applications. And Blitz addresses this. There's a couple aspects to scaling. One is the amount of code that you have, and then how that's organized. Blitz addresses this by organizing all your files by domain context. So all your pages, mutations, queries, and components for a certain, say, model, or in more general, a domain context, those are all organized in the same place. And this is the opposite of Ruby on Rails, which organizes files by type. So in Ruby, in Rails, all your models are in one place, and then all your controllers are in a totally separate place, and your views are in even another place. And so it's really hard to find all the code related to a certain thing like billing because it's scattered all around your application. But with Blitz, it's all organized together, so it's really nice. This also makes it easy to reorganize and refactor your file structure because you can drag and drop those domain contexts and folders around, and it just works. Now, code execution is the second way that you have scaling. So this is a lot of times this is where a monolith sort of breaks down because you have this entire server that you have to scale the whole thing. And so you have to have multiple instances of that entire server running. And then you have to manage those servers and load balance, and it's annoying. But this is where serverless really saves the day. So with I should have mentioned, you can deploy Blitz to a server or serverless. You have the choice. If you deploy Blitz to a server, you have the same monolith scaling issues. But again, you may not need to scale and it might be fine. But if you deploy to serverless, then all your queries, mutations, API endpoints, etc., are all individual serverless functions. And so they scale automatically and independently. And so the whole scaling issue with a monolith basically disappears. So it's super nice. All right, moving on to stability. We all love stability when it comes to our dependencies because we don't like bug fix or breaking changes and bugs in other people's code that we depend on. So we will continue in the footsteps of React and Next.js, which have done a very good job of being stable, not having a lot of breaking changes, not a lot of bugs. And one way we're going to address this is to have some sort of predictable release cycle like Ember. Now, Ember has 4 different release channels. They have Canary, which is like the latest on the master branch. And then they have a beta release channel where the next stable release is in beta for 6 weeks. And so this ensures that there's a minimum period of time for bugs to be worked out and for it to become stable before it's marked as stable. And then the stable release is released every 6 weeks. Lastly, they have a long-term support option, which is released every 6 months. And you get continual bug fixes for that, but you're guaranteed that there's not going to be any type of like breaking chains, and you can just get bug fixes for a long term. So depending on what the needs are for your app, you have this option. So we'd love your input for what you want to see here for Blitz, because it's, this is still up in the air. We will do this whenever we go to 1.0. Lastly, we follow a request for commits process. It's quite informal right now, but we will make it more formal as we grow. And what this is for any big feature or change that we're going to make to the framework, we open an RFC discussion to outline why we want this change, what the changes are, what the impacts and implications are, and maybe the trade-offs. And this is really great because it gives the community time to review this, to comment, and make sure that whatever need they have is met by that. And it makes for just a really nice, it makes for a healthy community, really, and a framework that meets everybody's needs. Lastly, community over code. This is the most important principle, because people are far more important than anything else. They are more important than code style, than code architecture, etc. People are the most important. We treat every person with dignity and worth. We are all in this together. We all want a framework that makes us productive and is fun to use. We are all more similar than we are different, and so we should bond over our commonalities and not be driven apart by our small differences. We can and should solve problems together. This always makes for better solutions. And this is what community looks like. As we come to the end, let's talk about how you can get involved. Blitz is not backed by a company. And this is a good thing because it means Blitz is a framework by the community for the community. There's not one company that has control over the framework. And anyone can come in and influence the direction of the project. But this also means we need your help. So we invite every single one of you to join and help make Blitz an awesome framework. There's different ways you can contribute. You can contribute via code. We have a lot of open issues that are marked as ready to work on. And we also mark issues as good first issue and good second issue. The good first issues always get picked up really fast, so make sure you watch the repo if you want one of those. Documentation can always be improved. We welcome any improvements there. You can make video courses, blog posts, and anything that helps anyone in any way is always appreciated. Lastly, donations and sponsorships are a great way to support Blitz and ensure that it lasts well over the long term. As an individual, you can sponsor on GitHub or Patreon. If you go to the Blitz repo and go to the top and click on sponsor, you can see the options there. And we also have sponsorship tiers for corporations. So if you're a company and interested in sponsoring us, I would love to talk to you about how that would work. And that's all I have for today. So the best way to get started is go to blitzjs.com. My Twitter handle is flybear, and the Blitz handle is blitz_JS. Thank you so much for your attention today, and I hope you try out Blitz, and I would love to hear your thoughts about it after you try it out. Thank you.